There we go.
What?
Did you give them the flash drive?
I gave the flash drive just now.
Let me know when you're ready.
Ready?
Contention 1 is centralized injustice. Centralized solar energy is inevitable globally, especially in Mexico. Parkinson 13, China, the US, Japan, and new emerging markets will be drivers of demand. We're witnessing globalization of the PV industry. The US is approaching more half to parity. South Latin America surge. Utilities go vouchers for public beverages out of Mexico to be among the strongest markets out. Status quo efforts to provide energy access have failed. Millions of rural communities in Mexico face energy poverty that strikes at the heart of human quality of life. The plan alleviates it. A lockdown Santos 11, Mexico achieved electrification coverage of all but 3.5 million contracted whole community electrification is remaining as challenging as the majority of them are isolated communities. While electrified population is expected to increase by 20% of these communities lack basic services, water, telecommunication, education, health, poverty, can hinder to the human quality of living in many definitions. The same element of single quality of living and low life expectation to overcome Mexico's variety of programs will implement severe few impact successful reducing poverty and having lasting effect. PV technologies and managed to all people can pay for the use of technologies and develop these changes. People just need the tools. Now, specifically, indigenous communities in Mexico are disproportionately affected by water deprivation, elite commodification of nature, the lack of resource autonomy, sustains indigenous culture, and is a prerequisite to environmental justice. Carruthers and AD, because they are the poorest and most disenfranchised, indigenous communities have been disproportionately impacted by the unsustainable management of water. Communities dependent on agriculture at risk along with its waste by hydroelectric development and sea. The water system is deeply and polluted by industrial development. Disenfranchised Mexicans cannot exercise their right to protect them as long as the environment when nature is commodified, at least create wealth for themselves and poverty for others. When indigenous communities can impede with exploitive scheme, when they open the new door for possibilities for preserving meetings and more sustainable resource management for these communities in Mexico, the environmental justice movement is more than a movement to enjoy benefits of environmental protection. Environmental justice means control over resources. Environmental justice will be achieved alone answers to questions how we have to interact with nature and construction. Now, this system of environmental injustice creates disposable population that threatens an emerging apocalypse that demands challenging short-term catastrophe focus. Visible violence developed from subterranean structures of inequality. Nixon and Nine Empire into what repression now custody. Cost and cause of chaos on their side. Discrimination predates disaster. Core of disaster can point back to environmental reason for to the poor, or only can for a future that cannot be objective poor and having them and terrorism and communities core vulnerability can and beyond the visible world. Parents left on our people find themselves placed in radiation and are pursued by nuclear holocaust. The world of the visible must be investigated without effect to second reality. This obligates to research environmental time starting to show broad parameters against the immediacy of catastrophe, temporal and spatial depression of environmental violence will pass beneath the radar. Marginality is perpetuated by the dialectic of ordinary disaster whereby calamities rendered unforgettably ordinary because of the burden of risk falls unequally uneven economic development opportunity involved living with some backwards communities. Now, this outweighs any impact on probability and magnitude. Risk assessment is epistemologically biased towards white male elites. You discount the severity of localized environmental hazards and destroying marginalized communities. Virtue in 96. Risk assessment and policymaker viewed as an objective tool and irrefutable certainty. The perspective of unavoidably influences tactics, culture, perpetuity, discrimination, domination, exploitation, and kind of language as consideration. The decision for white men to do risk assessment decision to be so made with political and moral consideration on the table. We must ignore its attitude and identity risk assessment made as an attitude about it to hearing and will risk that woman placed on color and all widely shared by way of an practice system environmental protection that despise what men's perception of risk different because some women people are more vulnerable to benefit lessly and because they have less power people are more likely to attack their hazardous waste like to return to the yard to be environmental harm needs to core face the difficulty in the sorting hazard right and so I told the political business we here has to be policymakers about dramatically less threatening hazard the world said harmful when they hazard environmental hazard the road community will create stress and will take neighborhood. Now focus on underlying structures producing violence outweighs any one-shot linear cause for violence. Hendrick and I we are not linear relationships in terms of unpredictable underlying patterns produce wild conflict requires orientation from a focus on events and specific outcomes to really nation of patterns and emerge over time. Their contingencies to events and one all these cause with their distractions between patterns to shape the life beyond events and understanding cause and patterns. All uncertainty and non-linearity are inevitable due to inherent complexity within systems. Ramon and only complex systems not working in a linear fashion. Their causes not be positive. Multiple influence linearity as the problems are broken into pieces. Important to understand interaction along variables of linear logic suggests that based on B resulting to MC and impact D complexity suggest that system future events cannot be forecasted rather than rejecting winning principles do accepting that probability outweighs magnitude. The logic of any risk of extinction outweighs destroys rational risk assessment. Kessler and native risk is defined by potential loss. Even the highest degree of probability becomes irrelevant. Loss goes to infinity. Risk management as rational advice and never breaks down the certainty of precondition for catastrophes without warning. We find meteorites, tsunami, 9/11, and have the most serious futures about adaptation, scenarios, impossibility of conjecture, long chain of possibilities, and probable eventual link to the collective scenario to understand the impression of possibility connection between all kind of percent and refuted but not prevented probably a possible connection after some evidence on evidence of accidental contention. 2 is scalar politics. The planned shifting of scale of energy decision making spurs social movements despite complexity. Miller and not how live there. Every transportation system reveals important dimensions of diverse and complexity of transportation operates at an intersection of several international issues. AG policies are top down other agreement daily decision to energy system define what we do to build human societies develop robust frameworks for assessing the human concept of energy system change and we must cluster energy justice for the hardships in energy governance energy system change will bring social change from societal management from people to homeowners and teaching the relationship with the centralized social technological systems around the global community are mobilizing its consequences of energy system driven life to social progress and taking choices what kind of society people want to live in how society will distribute power wealth and what society must run the power for whom the strategy to mitigate the worst accessible helping to ensure energy systems are more just now shifting in scale fosters empirically successful grassroots movements against environmental injustice elites towers 2K grassroots the environmental leaders at scale of every extreme justice between centuries and the public voice and production decisions generates environmental pressure of several governmental counter to defeat the country big corporations that border conservancy one strictly slide and seal of every experience into environmental justice corporation environmental and government and with the repression environmental racism grassroots environmentalism collection the logic of capitalist economics and socially reduces social production of space and development applies the landscapes and scales of meaning and scales of relation these skies these scales categories and intersect geographically politically generating generating complexity to come series of patterns which people are politically boundaries in the scale may start political action individuals operate a variety of scales changing strategically scale meanings to serve political purposes of distinct scale and increasing organizational motivation to actively contribute by drawing expertise on hand emphasis on the grassroots scale results and prevent environmental quality industrial has on the alternative production of methods that reduce toxic capital significantly by shaking the scale of environmental meaning to where you live in environmental social and increasing people across race and class. Now current policies are framed to an elite scale that overcoats local struggles with elite interests. The framing of the one they see around injustice challenges the top-down managerialism and canon 3. Scale social construction waves of dividing order for political purpose scales on a neutral background discussion favor pressure process which seek to admit others of policy to the 1960 civil rights movement was successful in creating more support because of Frankie and last return of rights for politics were to do the various actions that have to frame reality that promote their interests and enable them to build what's politically and scales of politics goes important consequences and release of their agenda statement about the discourse to make themselves attractive investment is for the legitimizing policy that have unequal social developments and strategies of framing can legitimize political action and facilitate forms of economic development, social redistribution and government. Thus the plan. The United States federal government should provide decentralized integrated photovoltaic electrification assistance to Mexico. Connection 3 insolvency. The past MREP focused on solar home system. They can't at all 2K MREP complements programs of the Mexican government planning focused on solar home system. Now that's why integrated PV system solves best. Distinct from past policies since it goes beyond as suggested from a local integration. They can't at all 2K. This time is like to look beyond as suggested toward other PV application impacting rural development too. And explore the potential PV there and need for policies and collaboration among institutions like from the energy, agriculture, health, education, other sector organizations that are involved in rural development, various against the investment cost of black financing infrastructure, familiarity and political commitments, PV programs to use energy of different sector programs, society offering systems to integrate projects over strategy of comparison, creating non-sustainable markets. These have discussed the MRP, graduate a gradual participatory approach to road electrification projects, and focus on prioritize with the energy needs of communities, water pumping, improvement, health, street lighting, household electrification. Now, multiple mechanisms ensure that the plan solves disposed over ASCS 99 PV, SAC established guidelines to ensure the successful photovoltaic project MRP, aspects of partnerships are critical to progress, and safety partnership well established project implementing coordination, including government agency, non-governmental organizations, wrong words, with the use of connection, convincing goals, Mexico's or energy association, now building and community capacities will use and maintain renewable energy fundamentals, and work structure effective and efficient means of reaching large numbers of people and organization, technological assistance, ensuring projects are decided to provide superior expertise that may not be available in country or partner organization with experience with need less assistance and handle everything themselves. Right.
Why does the United States federal government need to take action against Mexico to resolve these problems in the status quo?
We're not taking action against Mexico. I don't understand. I don't like the
plan. The United States federal government should provide decentralized integrated photovoltaic electrification system.
There's environmental injustice in the status quo. Because people are not given access to energy.
Okay.
The way that energy is working in Mexico is based on grid and centralization, where white male elites are the sort of people who are seen as benefiting the economy and productive members of society get energy first, and indigenous communities get energy last.
Okay, I get
they don't
that.
have energy
Where does
now.
the United States federal government play into this? And
Sure,
how does this decentralization work?
So it's things like solar panels that can go in people's on rooftops, and these are owned by local communities.
So the United States federal government give these to the local communities?
Yeah. The one I see doesn't take a stance on the exact on how it gets implemented in terms of like specifying every single portion of.
So if you say that white males are the
planning
ones
is a good
controlling
idea.
the system in Mexico, why isn't that the same if the U.S. provides this system?
I don't think that we should have to defend the entirety of the state. I think this is an instance of where the government is a good idea. The scalar politics
I know.
advantage of the
Which
great
card
interest
says
of
that the
everyone.
government will take the right action? I want a quote saying that federal government assistance is necessary.
Okay, the entire solvency advantage, comparing past government policies like these solar home systems, which were not able to provide good electrification coverage. Then it says that that's comparing it to PV technologies, which is the app, so that is capable of solving.
PV technologies. Which one says that U.S. is key?
When someone says that the U.S. is
Yeah,
key,
the US is
the
key to PV
ASCS
technology.
evidence. The entire the
Give me a
PV
line.
Okay, well, it's based off of the Mexico Renewable Energy Program, which is a program created by the
Just a
U.S.
line, please.
and Mexico. Okay,
That quotes the United States is necessary for this.
so I'm sure that if you're looking up your solvency evidence, all of the times that it says Mexico Renewable Energy Program, that's talking about the United States federal government.
All right, that's fine. What is scalar politics?
Scalar politics is the way that we discuss impacts, essentially. It's that instead of focusing on extinction and one-shot visible sources of violence, we should focus on what is considered to be a smaller source of violence, more close to the conflict by the policymakers, and that shifting of scale from big stick impacts to what happens on an everyday basis allows us
That
to
makes a
spur
lot of
grassroots
sense.
movements.
Okay, so your first piece of evidence, not first, the character's evidence says that when Mexican elites work with transnational capital in the United States, that's what caused the hemisphere program of free
Yeah,
trade
we're not
and neoliberal.
transnational. We're not transnational capital.
But
we're not
how-
multinational corporations.
Then how does federal government assistance to decentralize work?
I don't understand how every time the federal government acts that it's private sector acting.
What piece of evidence or what defense do you have of your plain text?
The entire solvency advantage depends on a linkage between the USFG and Mexican communities.
What is environmental justice?
Environmental justice is the ability for multiple pieces of evidence. It's essentially like the ability to have resource autonomy and control over energy decisions.
And you give this to people in Mexico.
Yeah, well, we don't essentially give it to them, we provide access to it.
Provide access to it. And then what do they do?
Sorry?
What do they do with it?
That's up to them. That's the thesis of our alternatives, and they should be able to choose what they do with energy.
Or often, it's just for contention.
Take a second, prep. Just to take it, it's not worth it.
The mastery of case.
Do you got the case?
Is it 10 or 8 minutes of prep?
It's 10, you took 3 seconds.
I think we took 2 seconds. Just flip it over. Ignore the first off.
Is anyone not ready?
I don't have it.
Ignore the first off.
Okay, ready? First off is politics needed political capital's gain public support reforms will pass right now. PR Newswire 920. Survey of energy reform shows a majority of countries supporting the opposition need to remain popular with the Mexican public that is trying to into early support for energy. The president is starting his campaign for positive positions. Now, U.S. engagement with Mexico is unpopular hyper-nationalism and past intervention. This is starring 12. The anti-American elements that operate in a powerful and U.S. interference. Domestic measure remains a strong barrier that reduces arrangement with Mexico. False policy unacceptable to U.S. interest in Mexico that found this political autonomy to trade a situation where Congress interest now needed political capital is key to energy reform. Since Wilkinson in Boston 13 years will have expended a serious political capital and passed a controversial reform deal. It will have the votes of many opposition for energy reform to rely heavily on nationalistic energy reform and capitalist. Wait, now reform is key to solve for Mexican economic growth since Halen 13. Economic overall has the potential to drastically alter the North American energy market to be able to what's quite an energy revolution before would allow foreign companies to establish proprietary contract with competitive energy before would be the biggest win for Mexico economy since NAFTA. Reform has the potential to drastically boost the Mexican economy and will be put to double Mexican economic growth. Now Mexican growth solves for poverty. This is going in 7 to 30 more Mexico now worse off than were what's called culture entering which was still poverty. So what you don't have to bring the draw. The only feasible permanent answer is to reduce poverty in Mexico is through economic growth. The economic growth and the poverty rate is stubbornly high. Now next off is decreasing white supremacy is dominating political system that governs status quo. Politics we pass policies to satisfy a social contract that is inherently racist. The mission of any measure of the system is not accidental coordinated. This is Mills in 97. White supremacy is dominating political system that has made a modern world war. You will not find in the political theory though it's covers well, there's no mention of the basic political system and the mission that is not accidental white state racial privilege. So much for granted they do not even see it as a political it's the back end or against all the system which I see the political and highlighted that African Americans would do the work in which way the aggressively against the broader debate. We need a global theoretical framework for a situation discussed on white race and to challenge our subset of white political philosophy and racial concept. One of the possible ways for making connections due to the vocabulary already developed the conscious to back our knowledge system. Now the only ethical question is to call for the end of the world, calling attention to the antagonism that undergirds the USA is the only way to address the conflict within it. Like the 1AC this Wilderson into 10. They draw attention not in the way which is facing time or abuse, but powerful interest, but into the violence on the right to one more capacity to think they would have to be created to call the world itself into not in mere and discriminate possible, but the world itself will sound that's just will make the world but to the most loose enunciation of African violence, repairing the demonstrated subjectivity of display the structure of the United States and taking over the dismantle could have been absolutely important conflict that had promoted to take the class struggle, general conflict, immigration rate, plus or left, anything can go by easily spoken down, so ubiquitously spoken that two simple said and only region is crazy, that it's impossible to do. Imagine could have decided to chastise that arms to struggle mercifully, but they could not just win the revolution, that's because they could not be convincing to the self most to the level of ethical or something. The hard elected retreat as the white radical and who were retired for the struggle. The question echoes like here in the great black man has gone as a young voice in the affected seismic shift of the political landscape with the intellectual protocol and inquiry within the revolution that harmful retreat undefended as things grammar can be uncensored, which is cinematic, which is very spectacular imaginary social turmoil was to bring a conflict and irreconcilable struggle between the revolutions, which on dialect but it tells our leadership one of the position the grand antagonist breaks down the menacing conflict regardless of Centennial and the film of spirit, demobilization from political discourse to question out the one he sees as a perfection of slavery. This barley in 2005, the movement from slavery segregation, U.S. segregation movement, slavery perfecting itself all over when it bows down, the slave accomplishes the impossible reconciliation, which the freedom when it's unfair, freedom by willing itself or free the slave bows down when they pay for legal relief for equal rights only when the last equal rights can the slave perfect itself as slave and dream equality, directly pray for equal rights, slave race, that's pray for equal rights, if there's a slave perfect mode now that it's not altered by all costs by any means necessary, seeing as citizens the undiscovered country is an invitation for another better world, memory out, the repetitions make a life out of that, and impossible to work through the repetition that's involving intent, seeing undiscovered country for which it was an invitation for another fragmented made out of repetition, not choice repetition of opposed to freedom knowledge, what we do knowledge, what we are doing to require we face it, so we blessedly to Christ, but what it's as an entire world to win with nothing to do, not based must be projected in every instance, what's that succeed just by trusting creates another, and it's truly the capital sin, that means 2000 struggle against racism is to be undertaken, was a concession to accept the racist universe to endorse that fear, just and violence, or can happen on world or let alone legislate or on racism, because racism signifies the exclusion of the other is subject to violence, domination, injustice, and jaded of violence, that's all injustice, society continues to teach of its own, there's a refusal, racism, condition for all morality, as the culture to commence political control is not accepted, the only conflict, violence, and destruction will be on the next office, the camp, like Texas, the federal government of Mexico, to actually increase decentralized integration of photovoltaic electrification, they can do it, empirically proven, code and foster 09, widely adopted PPA technology, Latin Americans, birthplace for small rural solar electric system use of PV system trying to increase dramatically to many thriving businesses throughout the rural region. Active were followed by the large-scale electrification activities sponsored by Mexico. In Mexico, there was large-scale government PV rural electrification projects in the states of chapters more than 12 other systems were installed. Now go on to case turn and centralization. Environmental justice is essentialist, applies universal ideas of substance and pursues a fake biological notion of race. This Yamato limit of one. The Stanley framework assumes that all racial groups are the same. This assumption is long-standing perception that race is fixed biologically determined rather than socially constructed. Is rooted in perception of the skin color and has a reason for ill treatment, but it's also why the irrelevant number of quotes and environmental justice. This implication assumption of our race and culture now be that means the African not solve environmental justice focus divorces race from a social fact that this is an act of racial avoidance. This is Yamato and limit 01. The racial categories are not biological reality, but socially constructed by conceiving and fixing objective. The environmental justice framework tends to treat race and neutral a political divorce from the social contract. The reflects the inclination of what books are commented. What's facing a paper revolution. They're looking into the examination of racial history. The current racial disparities are not environmental justice still utilizes Western understanding of nature, making it impossible to solve because it produces alter ways of conceiving the relationship between humans and nature. Yamato and limit 01. The Eurocentric conceptualization of nature has dominated discourse on environment, race, environmental racism, and reinforce a framework in which political segregation are confused with indigenous people creating problems of race and environment will not be solved until greater attention paid to the indigenous people will self review environmental justice and depart from the established framework. There is an intimate relationship between the spiritual world, the physical world, and the social world. The American system of environmental value has failed to recognize the human value. Environmental values are intimately connected with who we are as being. Now the F mechanism for resolving environmental justice ignores and reinforces structural causes of environmental justice. The idea that single government action of redistributive justice can rectify years of sitting policies and pollution is naive. Government action will only build via exclusion. This is Yamato limit 01. The established framework affairs distribution is the primary means of achieving the environmental justice. Fostering rejects subject to monolithic. The mental focus too much on outcomes and not enough for a process to produce an outcome. The residential segregation discourages on the regulation and also racial disparity available adjusting balance and political access to white flag. The framework approach to the public world. It's also limited preference to provide relative self-interest itself. They distorted existing inequality poorly constructed result of exclusion on unequal political class or progressively unequal, not affirming the basis of the environmental justice movement. Their reading of expert sources ignores the original narratives and basis of those suffering, voting to the experience of those who can speak this margins in the process of public knowledge construction. The story is wrong for the people, also by which access to the documents, those of intellectual property, those organized by the change that faceless, namely individual movement, history is interpreted and analyzed by those who access to research, documentation, publishing, folks become authors, that be also become the expert where you need to create a story that is standing in contrast to the hegemonic narrative. By expert, we are subject to non-articulation, political system, white supremacy knowledge, constructed primarily on Western thought and happiness through the universal, which is decided on the slowest pace. Justice can move on. We need to break down and decolonize the process. So it's holding many as a legal storytelling can stand in contrast to the dominant conception of what it constitutes expertise to counter discourage our powerful strategies that reject the complexity theory. It is so non-flawless, so violent, refers to nihilism. This is Kisaman 07. This problem really is still possible that chaotic sense also everything expected to occur can be explained in the result of chaos theory. It must be tested on the explain not predicted is the ultimate criteria good theory. Approach that expresses that anything which is connected fully explain what must be done with theory at all. Now, the United States remains institutionally racist and defeated in 2000. The U.S. remains a racist system, no large-scale action have been able to rebuild the situation from foundation of the institution of race, we're deciding to keep anti-black oppression firmly in place. The American House racism and model put its formidable foundation remain firmly in place.
Okay, so
What's the status of the counterplan of these two?
It's actually conditional.
Explain what that means.
We will always have a unconditional advocacy that the United States federal government is a bad entity. However, whether we can kick the counterplan or the critique is conditional.
Okay, let's talk about the counterplan. Your code of evidence says that Mexico did PV technology in the 1990s, therefore they can do it again.
Yes.
The affirmative is a response to the PV program done in the 1990s, and we say that it was done centralized, not decentralized, which created environmental racism.
Our code
Where's
of
your evidence?
evidence card indicates that Latin America has been supporting PV technology
Right.
itself. It literally said Latin America
Mexico
is
can
a
do it
thriving
because they
business
did it in
for
the
rural
1990s.
also if you read the counterplan text, it says decentralized.
Can I get my question?
Yeah.
Where do you have evidence that says that Mexico can do decentralized form of an energy?
The code of foster code just indicates that Mexico can't give this PV technology
Right.
to
My
rural
question is
regions. They have done it in the
centralized
past.
versus decentralized.
We have as much evidence as you have about the United
No,
States
you
federal
don't.
government doing it.
Where is the evidence say, okay, that's fine. Mexico politics. Mexico is our third largest trading partner.
Yes.
The Senate just passed a bill on Monday that would increase our oil relations with each other. Your STAR evidence makes a structural claim that increasing
Sorry,
relations
talking
in
about
general
domestic
is
matters. Those oil transported reserves are an international affair that Mexico will not proceed. But PV technology is something that Mexico has been doing a program.
Where's your
according
evidence?
to
Where's
your
your
1AC.
make evidence make the distinction between
Star Code
domestic
is
issues
actually
and
very
relations
good.
in
It's just
general?
that anti-Americans undertook to operate a powerful impediment to U.S. intervention in domestic matters. They have a nationalist tendency to keep the United States out because they think that they're being pro.
So things like the bill, which takes Mexico's nationalized oil industry and opens up to the U.S., seems like that would link just as much. Or
No, it doesn't open up to the U.S. It just restructures Pemex to be able to invest privately, not just to the United States. It just helps the private.
But
Pemex,
the U.S.
yeah.
imposes this. All right, that's fine. Your race critique. The 1AC is a discursive challenge to the idea that the white male elite is the main subject, and it's a discussion of environmental racism. The only link you've read is a link
United
of
States federal
omission.
government to give.
The only
PV
link you've read is a
technology
link
to
of
Mexico.
omission.
No, that's not.
All right, sir.
You're saying
How
that-
does the Mills
wait,
evidence
wait,
apply? How does the Mills evidence
The
apply?
Mills evidence applies because it's a uniqueness claim. The underlying political system that you're making these policies off are based off a system of whiteness,
So we can never use the federal government.
not in this current system.
Not in the current system. What does that mean?
That means that your plan is based off of underlying assumptions of whiteness. And
No,
it's
you just
freedom
said
from
that makes a
Like,
general
you may
uniqueness
claim that your authors are not being white, but we are. All the environmental justice cards we read on the case just proves it.
All right, let's talk about those cards. The case terms are about the U.S. environmental justice movement. The affirmative, the corruptors evidence, says that the distinction between the U.S. environmental justice movement and the Mexican environmental justice movement
not
is that
about
the Mexican environmental justice movement includes questions
It's
of
not about
indigenous
U.S.
rights.
environmental justice movement. It's about U.S. environmental justice policy.
That's
how they
okay.
miss
That's
the
not
vote.
my question. My question is,
There's a
how does this
distinction.
apply, given that our evidence makes a distinction between
Because you
indigenous rights
the
and
United States federal government do a environmental justice policy in Mexico.
Okay, I'm flashing it now.
Wait, can you take correct for a second?
Sure.
That's not 50.
Y'all use so much crap.
Okay. Actually, I'm taking a second for this one.
They just started to take it themselves. When they asked 8 or 10, I was like 8. It was like, you offer the option, we'll take 8.
Shit, I should give 12.
Okay, 9:36. AJ, where's this stand?
Okay.
In the meantime, I guess the order is going to be case, Mexican politics dissad, Mexico counterplan, and the K.
One more time?
Case, Mexican politics, counterplan, K.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, can I still use the water?
Yeah.
Okay, anyone not ready? Okay. Status quo deprives millions of Mexicans of a basic standard of living through an elite commodification of nature and lack of energy. The plan breaks down centralization, which allows Mexicans to control their own energy through localized decision-making, which fosters grassroots movements against injustice. Going to line by line. The first argument first is about environmental justice and the absence of the specificity of the 1AC evidence, and second is there's no link just about biological race. We just point out marginalized communities that have been affected, and third is the card is about U.S. corruption says that the key difference with Mexico is that it is a localized movement not controlled by elites. Next is that you use the nature, but the discussion of the 1AC is in the context of privileging indigenous populations over the Western values. Next is that you should prefer the specificity of our solvency over their marginal government action. Is we create a long-lasting solvency because we create workshops that allow them to become in control of their own power even after the U.S. does the initial tax transfer. And now the next argument is about expert, but one we use intellectuals involved in environmental justice in Mexico, and second is shifting the scale of impacts empirically involves communities. That's Miller's. And next is complexity. They just say that predictions are good. We say yes, but only when they're based on complete pictures, not linear prediction. Now next is the institutional racism, but the USFG is never was a question of how we frame the 1AC. And second, we get the US out in the long run, which solves best go to Mexican politics. Don't evaluate the dissat as not an opportunity cost to the plan, and Pemex reform exacerbates inequality. Can't turn the case. The green left 917 private investment in Pemex and from the same neoliberal ideology that overseen dramatic shifts in distribution of income in Mexico since 1980s. No accent. Mexico is now home to the world's richest individual as well as most desperately poor. The decades of neoliberal reform resulted in deliberate inequality, and it links to their case harder because it gets the U.S. and foreign investment involved, and the dissat is too complex to break. The agenda-setting process. La Roca in 6. Some issues rise on the agenda with one even threat to opposition. Agenda-setting is a mix of processes. Each operates independently. The other bureaucrats not always coordinate with Congress. There is unpredictability with actors. Some in contact with each other. The agenda process can be disorganized, unpredictably, even when all individual actors behave rationally. And growth wouldn't solve problems. The just as Nieta promised to solve it, but that's a political posturing. And no link. The ASC is evidence proves that the plan is done through lower-level intergovernmental partnerships and tax reforms on Reuters 1017. Mexican lawmakers will propose changes on 162 tax overhaul. Nieta hopes to boost the country's tax receipts. Nieta has grappled with linguistic opposition and lobbying efforts to push a fiscal reform led complicate other legislation, including bill to open the oil industry. And no link. Uniqueness. A is trade with the largest trading partner. Is B is talk. The THA is in the Senate Castellanos 13. In the terms of renewable energy, the U.S. president pledged to secure energy future, including the need to develop clean energy by promoting investment to reduce carbon emissions through clean and renewable energy. Climate change can be slowed. The meeting between Obama and Nieto with a positive proposition from both sides, encouraging commitment from both countries to cooperate. Next is the counterplan. One, it doesn't solve the case. A is energy poverty. U, Mexico renewable energy program is a U.S. and Mexico bilateral program. All mechanisms in our ASCS evidence prove that the case is a dissat partnership building in community capacity and tech assistance. And B is scalar politics framing around the net benefit doomsday counterplan. The elite framing policies fails to shift the scale because it's perceived as promoting the interests of corporations and results in co-option by overcoding the social implications of policies as McCon. And C is that all of their evidence assumes centralized energy doesn't access rural communities and leaves control of energy in the hands of the elite and responsibility to decide the U.S. caused structural inequality through imperialism and business exploitation. We have the obligation to change the lead control and permutation do the counterplan, and permutation do both double action means double solvency and policy making in populations, Doomsday, Counterblend, Gertson, and all that. Mega projects are in Mexico that aim to optimize the resource management on unexploited areas. Efforts to strengthen these projects have intensified and by NASA. The policies characterized by construction of infrastructure. On the other hand, they focus on conservation, conflicting into gender contradicting companies are exploring protected areas policies not based on indigenous rights about participation, foster racism and colonialism, and threatening indigenous culture and territory. There are numerous violations against indigenous communities. The city should be adapted to the particularities of each locality. Collective action built to address specific needs of certain active special representation, not recognizable legally for service providers. Such situations lead to representative action and conditionality. Voting is your interpretation. They have one condition why advocacy rescue. They can create contradiction, crossplay arguments, strengthen their position, and advocacy skills or interpretation forces to go for their position forces in death ratio. Next is EK. Role of the ballot is to vote for who best solves inequality of the status quo. The act provides a better solvency, shifting the scale of politics to create inclusive movements for justice. That's millers and towers and permutation. Do both A's are localized renewable energy solution created synthesis between indigenous understanding planetary flows and Western solar knowledge created transition Thompson. And 10. Indigenous perspective presented by fear. Indigenous societies offers elements of ethnicity growth American indigenous people. The historical memory continues to struggle for new equilibrium which identifies the goals to dissatisfaction of need, the achievement of taking time, quality of life, and healthy flourishing and harmony with nature and planet. Must return to a balance based on solar energy flows. We've depleted hundreds of millions of years of accumulated solar energy, less than 300 years of industrial era to moderatively negotiated since the development of Western knowledge and science can complement indigenous knowledge into the new pluralist paradigm. Total Western linear perspective of history condemns as turning back at the clock to the redemption of the future. Indigenous autonomy is the starting point for building new egalitarian multi-ethnic the discourse of the globalization and narrative process of human possibilities, coordination, market, and economic agent. The Zapatista model created autonomous zones, but have not yet created a viable market for economic autonomy. The Zapatista growth models of degrowth, living well between cyclical organization towards renewable energy system also that must be oriented with locality and shown by the local community hampering natural balance and including wind, solar, small scale, hydro, wave, and local biofuels, not global agrifuels. And B is unavoidable anti-black ontology only applies to certain ways of thinking about modern knowledge relations. Only altering people's relationship with nature solves wise. And 6. Competitive system, the economy should be principally out of the dualistic mindset. The splitting off reason of motion now can be seen as conflicting human characteristics, splitting the nation from humanity. By the latter seen as in need of controlling the former, such as diets, led to the creation of market systems as well as racism and patriarchy. This economized perception of reality made the class system ultimately classism, the gender system, patriarchy, the race system, white supremacy. Never all began as a system of cultural imperialism. Later became racialized with the creation of concept of the white race and no link the focus on self-sufficiency of indigenous communities to end white male privilege and change the role of the ballot to whoever has the best implementable strategy to solve equality in the status quo, and focusing solely on race as the sole determining factor in causes of anti-blackness is totalizing ignores discrimination in conjunction with the black body like age and gender, ignores the lived experience of age and race discrimination like the Trayvon Martin case, Hancock. And 12. Age is also relevant to Imperial Martin Grant with 22 McCabe with 17 Anderson, 14 categorically multiplicity goes beyond conclusion, just has standard for attention. Attention to all these categories must occur as well as based on a shift from the first order question gender nation on tacked onto a racial analysis time dynamics. We must consider unique historical context, race in the United States, different modalities, expression, association, dispositions, ways of using, and your root cause claims are nonsense. A is the K can't explain subjugation of women or how racism developed differently in different parts of the world, and B is that time frame and existence of struggles in the status quo means they have no mechanism to solve, and C is injustice is local, the scale of politics with contention proves, and in order to win they have to prove that the F is worse than the status quo. The K does not turn the F. A is sequencing, we create a mechanism to solvency, and B is that they say that every struggle, as long as it is essentially focused on racism, is irrelevant. Is moral absolution of Hale and Boxley and 7. The principle in sexual disability stratification and exploitation, including environmental exploitation and injustice, which intersects with class and race stratification, radical left effective corporate education, be ecologically sustainable, anti-racist and anti-sexist, and you should prefer the lived experience with the crucially resistance of the current black community self-sin. And 3. You need not look for radical things that we already do, try to encourage them so much what we already do, anarchists, and it doesn't involve the state, the police, or the politician. We'll look out for each other. Participation very important in the black community. Consider child as one of the best illustrations of existing radical participation, participatory the connection between the individual and collective allows for the expression of who we are. You really have to look at the people who are trying to live and not necessarily coming to trying to come up with the most advanced ideas. We need to de-emphasize, we extract, and focus on what happens on the ground in every community. There is a need to stop advancing the ready-made plans and trust that people can collectively figure out what to do in this world. And whiteness isn't unstoppable, nor is it uncontested. Whiteness is productive in that it produces resistance contrary to its enactment.
Let's talk about this first card you read on the critique. It says that localized solutions cause loose synthesis and solar knowledge. You are making the United States federal government give PV technology to decentralized Mexico. Why will that not just reproduce the Western knowledge of this card?
Right, because it says that specifically when we implement things like solar technology and other forms of like these like clean technology, it means that we reorient those technologies, which yes are Western,
You
but we
reorient-
reorient
yeah,
them
people
around
are-
indigenous knowledge.
You
This part
reorient
is
this
really
policy.
specific.
You're saying that these people are receiving technology from the United States and that will reorient their perception of the United States?
No. They take the Western technology and instead of focusing on it as Western, they say this is how we can get intact with solar energy flows because Western use of science has been bad in the
So
past.
we
They
just give them
correct
more
that.
Western technology and like assimilate them into Western technology.
No, I disagree. It changes how Western technology is implemented, specifically when we've read a
Alright, so-
contention about why our discourse and the
Hang on, here's a
implementation
question.
of things are
If
connected.
there's a cocaine addict, would you give him more cocaine?
There's a big difference between big
Would you?
energy.
It's a yes or no question.
I mean, I don't know. That's
You
not
don't know.
relevant, and I don't know
You
what
do
you do
not
with
know.
addictions.
Okay, let's go on to
No.
case. First, environmental justice. You say it's not an abstract view, but you're having. You criticize the central government of Mexico, like the centralized project. You say that, and then you say that the United States federal government and Mexico should do environmental justice. How does that work out?
I'm confused by what the question was. I'm
You're
sorry.
saying that a centralized policy is bad, but yet environmental justice is determined on the central government. Why? How does that work?
Okay, right. So there's a difference in the two words centralization. First, centralized government control of centralized energy is bad. That doesn't mean the government is bad in all cases. The
So
government
they
can
should decide
provide.
what environmental justice means, who gets like the reparations, who gets like the solar energy. They should decide who in the
Okay,
community.
the 1AC, Carruthers and Ilaka and Santos evidence indicates that the plan gives solar panels to indigenous communities that are off the grid so that they have a source of energy so that they can
Who
have
decides-
things like clean water
How do
and
they
clean
decide
soil
which-
and not play
Hey,
in
how
toxic
do they
waste.
decide which indigenous community gets these technologies?
The 1AC framing decided who gets these technologies.
What is that?
We read a plan text which is pretty general. It says provide this technology to Mexico. However, the framing of the 1AC is around indigenous populations and why they are the ones who should get that technology instead of the white male elites who have dominated it in the past.
All right, that's fine. Complexity. What about complexity? Actually, that's fine. You say you use experts in Mexico. Why is that a good thing when we?
I never said we use experts in Mexico.
You read
I said
evidence
we
from
talk about
You
people
read
who are
evidence from social workers who work with these centralized
Right,
programs,
okay,
and they say
that's
that.
right.
those are bad.
We read a piece of evidence from an intellectual who is involved in the environmental injustice movement in Mexico.
Right. Did you ask about this?
40.
That's right. I have it. Counterplan K. Yeah, this said
Where's this
after the counterplan.
counterplan set? Okay.
Counterplan K.
Counterplan this said K. Anyone not ready?
I'm not ready. I don't know. Okay.
Ready? Alright. The counterplan is also 100% case in fiat that we do decentralized things for Mexico, which is the reason why we have as many songs as Afghan because even if they fail to pass the says that Mexico can do this PV technology, the reason why the counterplan solves no international fiat arguments, no new arguments because it causes the one year sandbag. That kills negative loss strategy, which was predicated off this wasting. The first argument does not make sense because the bylaw program does not solve. They don't have a solvency Afghan in the constitution affirmative, which is the reason why the counterplan solves it. The case is not decisively affirmative because the reason why the case is decisively scale of politics, except as you're going to find out, we're not going to go for this as an F but for the K because the counterplan is the reason why the United States federal government needs to stay the hell out of Mexico, and while the United States federal government should be protected in this without the scale of politics doesn't link anymore. Now he said that all that everything is content centralization. So is yours. The bylaw program is all in the content centralized education. And also, if centralization is bad, that means that the United States federal government, a rich white male elite, providing assistance to New Mexico is going to cause the same type of centralization that they compete with. So the return of the songs deficit to the affirmative reason why. Now he says responsibility this, that the responsibility this is linked to the Christian. You say that we have to have responsibility to people in Mexico, except you are forgetting about the people within our own homes, the blacks, the Latinos, the Asians, all suffering within the obstruction of white supremacy of the United States, which is the reason why it links to the K. The permutation due to the counterplan is already C7, which is a voting issue because it kills because the counterplan defeats the severed house of the United States federal government action, but also is the link to disconnected objective narration because they're just blindly using the United States federal government instead of actually interrogating the history beyond the United States federal government, which is a bad form of activism because you don't have a personal agent to action. Permutation due does not solve because as we'll find out in the K, doing the advocating United States federal government action will be bad. Now he said that the power in Mexico is the centralized. The counterplan fiat out of the centralization argument because this facility says that we'll do decentralization to Mexico, and also the Mexico politics argument is a link to the Mexico politics argument is another link to the criticism because Mexico does not want it. That's also a say no argument because Mexico hates the United States federal government. Now conditionality is a voting issue. It's not a voting issue. Out of counter issues, we get two conditional options and the status quo. The first argument is that we don't link to strategy because when they have dropped their contextual condition, which is our advocacy always say the same. We give the middle finger to the United States federal government. That will never change. Get your offense out of that. Now two is information processing software research argument because we're forcing research more in-depth policies and more policies if we do information. And also there's a real world policy making argument because in the real world you have to defend from the left and the right. And also it's paternal defense because you're more conditional. You didn't specify an H in the one issue which makes you conditional against shifts like that. Now go to Mexican politics now. We'll concede that this has not an opportunity cost, but classify once again that the disat link is a K because Mexico does not want US engagement. Forcing that plotting is more US neoliberalism. So the YC card explicitly says that the harm of the Mexican government were brought up by US neoliberalism. Just because you say that your type of fiat is different and yet you're a different type of line does not resolve the history and the bad action of the federal government. You can't make the federal government look good, and doing that is what the entire case is about. Go to the K right now. At the top, extend that vegan evidence which elucidates the thesis of our argument. U.S. society is racist, and although the ideals I gave with their reason can be used by anti-racist struggles to bring us about, no large-scale action have been taken to rebuild the system of racial from the foundation of that foundation of arguments key because the white supremacist framework has successfully incorporated other Americans' color via reformist projects like the one C. This debate is about method, and there are two distinct disadvantages to their method. First, the co-option. First, the foundation of white supremacy constantly re-securing the obsessive fashion through a process of reinventing via the tool of state. The political capitalism that sought to shatter white supremacy from the state have been absorbed and co-opted by the opposition. The one C views the state as an apparatus of violence, not the structure of gratuitous violence that makes their impact possible. That turns the case as a marginal and sex evidence. Now two is the perfection of slavery. The white sees demand for legal respect as a perfection of the slave as slave. When the slave bows down to his master, i.e. when the affirmative calls for federal equality in their policies, it ties his freedom to hopeless legal relief. That after emancipation and legal equality, the slave is truly perfect. He's shackled by the chains of his dependence to his master. You're not going to give a crack addict more crack. The relief is only possible via the master and can only granted by the United States as a gift upon state. We need to reject that type of thinking. The fact that the need itself means that the request of bail. The demand for equality becomes the point at which the slave expresses his fidelity and acceptance for life, acceptance for life. That is the fatherly evidence. Now, our critique term indicates their emancipatory discourse will not be possible without the fungibility of the slave. That's willingness to us and the discourse allowing the justification for the slave from that product, even having suddenly mere absolutely recognized slave. Emancipatory discourse presents further evidence of slave's fungibility. The fungibility of blackness enables what? Fight so increasing likely that slaves get disappear. Without this question of violence, the so-called emancipatory discourse of modern Valley, Marxist offenders of post-colonial sexual liberation, and ecology movement political discourse, practical grammar, sovereign who's constantly allowing us to exploit in life, might not have to allow the shadow slavery create the human culture to start entering from the urban elites. Now they see role of battle to whoever does inequality. First, that we're going to win this role of battle. Second, that we don't link to this argument because the Council still provides the legal relief that they talk about. And also, the only way to solve is to reject the state, which is all our overview evidence. Now they say permutation both. Permutation is mutually exclusive with the criticism, which extra discourse presenting our friend. First, that's the one sees the static offer. The permutation is severance of the one sees racist discourse. That's a bony issue because it makes the one see a moving target. Makes us not have stable legs. It also kills our skill because we never learn to defend anything unconditionally. The most important debate path. That's the voter for education. Also, the more not for more links. Their focus on foreign wars trades off with the focus on the borderline streets. As Rodriguez to us saying, if we are to approach racial neoliberals and U.S. domination global lay down students on cultural violence, political approaching America was us. That's left for the fundamental tolerated coming on the list of silence. The institutions how they use contemporary policing and kill the violence. Policies on take for granted and mystified permanent economic border. I'm not proud of let's use content to engage in desperate attempts to manage domestic warfare. Why do we forfeit the possibility of radically changing this logic transformation? Premise on the connection. Domestic warfare share with short-term will policy before our historical moment starts the need for political rupture of extended time needs and management of domestic warfare. Our one political move for grassroots pedagogy to a radicalist orientation today. Also, their epistemology bad is disconnecting objective narration, which is another link. Advocating for the federal government without interrogating history is a personal, without a personal connection is a epistemology of whiteness. Stone mediator to us and the modern episode of reveal of white about class we need to stimulate the news for the episode. The result is a tenor fair to care with the people who are social on the valley of today. Justice danger those institutes temporal with knowledge tradition, they are reliable inadequate. Such police and public debate is particularly troubling for it to reserve authority or detach oppression. We treat war as a recipe of possibility while people close enough to war of horrors than authority can speak. Now they say that we need to now they say that we need to question scale of politics. And this argument is not well just because it's Western Texas it means that it's Western technology. The United States federal government taking actions today just because the native indigenous people view it differently does not mean that the federal government is not used. Now he says that nature's key. Except environmental justice arguments are going to turn this argument because their relations with nature is bad. Now he says that there is no link because he tried to like no you do not. When I asked him why he you specifically says that you only provide this energy to people in Mexico. What about the people at home suffering from a lack of electricity and electricity? You ignore these domestic fights, which is the reason why you have a trade-off link for foreign discourse. Also, you do not solve also affirmative negative self-justice as well because of the counterpart. Now he said that there is benevolent implementation. No, you are not benevolent implementation. Cross-white arguments say that the federal government will always be bad and it's just a cover-up for the level left. Now he says that we have to solely talk about implementation. Solely talking about implementation is a bad form of debate because this debate is all about the methodology. You have our counterfeitation as the judges of pedagogy. The debate is a question of competing scholarship. Our link arguments present the scholarship of the white states problem because it's embedded with a racial system. Our debate is profitable because simulation is academically bankrupt and minimizes the agency debate. Focusing on scholarship will always produce its key to public education. That's missionless disease 2004. Conscious on influence of pure values go onto the public audience. The theory of debate is formally illustrational path. Debate is a place within institutions and counter diversity votes. The model has potential to counter liberation and emphasizing audience engagement. Goal of makes us to look at issues and raise the audience cognitive. Such an audience and always cultivates debate. The ability to argument skills who wins the widest shares of public deliberation. Now she said that we solely focus on race is bad. This card doesn't say anything. Just as things like age matter, except the focus of the fungibility of slavery. It's all based on race. And now she said that we ignore women. Cross-lines with Wilson and Evans saying that the fungibility of slavery made their feminist discourse possible. The time for arguments don't make sense because the Cameron also solid. The injustice in local argument is another link because they don't talk about the actual local injustice happening in the wars on that street, which is what the Rodriguez side says the key. Now she says that the sequencing this side also doesn't make sense because we say that we give specific reasons why the historical integration of the United States fundamentalism is necessary. The moral absolutes and arguments don't make sense either because moral absolutes is critical because we need to take whatever action we can. The wilderness evidence and the fatherly evidence of the alternative specifically says that we take every action against civil society. She said prefer lived experience. First, you don't get this argument because you do not do the lived experience of black people. The disconnected objective narration arguments already turn to this argument. Also, she says that whiteness is not all powerful. All you theories, the one ACP's of Wilson and the fatherly evidence specifically says that the system of whiteness is what built the slave, which is the reason why the alternatives are powerful methodology because the white sees a conflict within the paradigm of America as to the conflict that is America itself. Burning down the idea of America and giving the middle to the federal government is the only way to resolve racial struggles. Okay, take some prep. Okay, if you go to Prom Divorce, you need to read a couple cards. Read Willison, Hedges, Willison, down, Hedges, down, and just, alright, cool. That was 10 seconds, I think.
Okay.
6:23.
Given that I got up and read the 2AC, why do you keep saying he says?
I said she. I don't think you're paying attention.
No, you said he.
That's what she.
I disagree, but that's fine. Let's talk about the K, I guess. Why can we reject the U.S., why should we reject the U.S. government for being racist, but not reject the Mexican government for doing neoliberal reforms that are exacerbate inequality just as
First,
much?
we made arguments as to those neoliberal reforms in Mexico were based upon the U.S. action and U.S. neoliberalism, enticing
Right.
Mexico and
We've both agreed that,
Second-
that our discussion in this round matters, so why do you get to say you advocated a policy that you conceded was neoliberal when I read it in the 2AC and you kicked it in the block, but now you can go back and say we can fix that the Mexican government
Okay,
supported
that
things
makes
that are
no sense because
neoliberal?
all our link arguments are predicated off the federal government and the things that federal government has done. The Mexican government was not built upon the fungibility of the slave, which is what the Wilson evidence says is what the United States federal government is based off of. You need to read Carson that, but you didn't. Like, that argument doesn't make sense in the context of this
We
debate. The resolution question is should the United States federal government take action? We say no, screw the United States federal government. There's other ways to solve your harms without relying on an entity that just perpetuates violence.
Okay, that's fine. What does the alt do in the face of indigenous communities lacking access to clean water?
First, there could be technically two alternatives. First alternative is a counterplan, resolves that. Second argument is we say that the wars on home are more important than those indigenous communities because those indigenous communities were not a result of federal government domination, but instead the federal government has
I
perpetuated
disagree.
conflict
Indigenous
upon-
communities are marginalized because of the way that policies have been acted by government institutions from the way that we colonized
from the
Latin.
U.S.
From Eurocentric like European institutions that colonized them.
Then why do you call upon the United States to take a policy to try and alleviate this?
Things
That
like
makes no
NAFTA.
sense.
Okay, what does the alt do in the face of things like NAFTA that have had U.S. intervention that has hurt Mexico? Do we just say,
The alt is to reject the federal government and reject everything it stands for, like NAFTA.
okay, so what do you resolve about the part that the Mexican government has played in policies like NAFTA has played in parts like Pemex reform to open up to foreign companies?
First, the Mexican government is fundamentally different because it does not understand the
Right.
historical assumption we made. Second,
However,
the Mexican
okay,
government is only messed up because of the United
No,
States
right, so
government.
you
and we're
say that it's
rejecting
important that we focus on the local struggles here. However, there are struggles that the 1AC pointed out that said the Mexican government has structurally ignored indigenous communities,
We
and you
said-
said that doesn't matter because we need to focus on people who've been ignored
Okay.
at home. Why do
First,
we not
that's-
focus on the people who've
That's
been
a
ignored
question
in
of
other
impact
countries?
calculus. We see that the struggles here are more important. Second is that rejecting the federal government would resolve that because the reason why the Mexican government took messed up policy was because of U.S. neoliberal influence.
It's going to be first a critique, and then case.
Michael, is the video recording on?
Yes. Is it in that Dropbox?
No, I put it on right there.
Oh.
I'm sorry, it was, what is it? K case. The K is on the link debate. Or term debate, my bad. Anyone have it?
Okay.
The rhetorical pluralist reform to help protect and maintain stability of black suffrage that underwrites the foundation of the U.S. legislative antics, how civil society maintain the legitimacy Wilson and intellectual protocol, not permitted to understand black men. We live in a millennium which has diversity of civic participation exists between the protesters and those that narrowly consider this what we get found which the critique of paradigm does not mean intellectual protocol had a rapid suffering which underwrites the United States fair capital intellectual debt. These lay activated inquiry no more effective of pursuing revolution critique the legislative antics of the loyal oppression. Now reformism and engagement has no political critical potential. The liberal class is dead. This hedges in 11 the liberal concept believes that the political tendency by sole capitalist state and agent of state something for the corporate state distinction always be the same as the enemy. The destruction of all the radical military mutable for to a new idea. And it now functions like a commercial brand, giving a different layer of resource mechanism of corporate power, the local class, and incapable before just now hold on with the break the rebels who have the physical courage to find the power in the lead market card there. Now,
Go to case and go back to the if you have time.
okay, case. First, it's going to be the essentialism, just that the environmental justice framework relies upon the essential notion of race over a pleasant theory of environmental consequences, assumes that all it needs are the same rooted in the theory's assumption that race is biological fixed in determined category, which when it's socially contingent and fluid, that's John Monroe limited for the one to see their internal terms, their environmental justice universal focus on neutral conception of race divorced from social content and misunderstanding the role of race in society, obscure racial history and statistical racial disparity. Now, obscure differential forms of disparities, minority disputes, and conflicts turns to affluence, Yamato and Limino 1, clean change the differential forms of disparity among community of color. The racial pattern must be a separated concept of the dominating political and academic pattern only when groups of knowledge. They are differential pattern and disparity can be a bring about the collision in the light of the historical interaction pattern relation underlying. Well, we can all instead of belief in the complexity clearly for group and justice racial groups that face some real life into claims that just are likely to understand that although without intended differently the racial issue, racial group cannot be addressed equally issue on multicultural and mistrust. Now, here are some quotes from their 180 authors, and this is a lack of statistical water telecommunication education tells that on electoral population and true public extreme the southern state, the focus on they only highlight the first part, which is a focus on the health part, the first focus on solely leaving housing notes the environment just operates differently. Then there's a specific indigenous population marginalization. This is Yamato Limino 1. Lazarus identified the conceptual flaw treating all racial groups in the same agents flow of the individual human race that separates recognized but a single standing individual physical health. The concepts of environmental justice are different from Native Americans. The concepts of recognition, unique historical legal aspect of Native American environment risk post identical Native population. Here's their towers code. The grassroots movement, environmental movement, better named as the environmental justice movement to transcend the environmental justice applies to the scale of humanity, which assumes that all the environmental justice movement just incorporates everyone into a melting pot and can solve for the call for the environmental justice. It's now the second. It says that the environmental justice is Eurocentric, utilized conception of nature, in which humans are viewed as separate from nature, which is antithetical to indigenous conceptions of nature that place humans as interconnected with nature. Now, after they shift away from Eurocentric conception of nature, nature environmental destruction is inevitable. This is Yamato, that's the model from the one I see. Now, thereafter marginalizing the indigenous population. Yamato Limino 1, Huffman criticized the adjustment from the work from Native American environmental orthodox environmental assumes the experience scientifically correct natural condition tends toward oppressive command and control method. Anthropocentrism American environmental classic with native cultural belief and American environmental assures a biocentric approach that opposed for economic development. He criticized the environmental protected luxury good driven by Western society. Now the affirmative focus on environmental justice movement towards outcomes and away from the process single mechanism that redistributes resources that fails for environmental justice concern because they ended going process for environmental justice. We define the solves the arguments that the effort simply hand out sparks of the environmental justice movement proves something that trades off with broader efforts as Yamato limited. Now the empirical negative civic engagement is not synonymous with grassroots organizing. It shifts to that resulting in institutionalized co-option by the government. This is Martinez. No way. The environmental movement is financially channeled by the turn to civic engagement. Environmental justice has been impacted by the institutional co-option by the government, executive cooperating institutional government, university, neoliberal, whimsical funding, trade out, serious non-profit has no health insurance. For the majority of people is still unemployed, employed to make up all the working poor. Now the one is here represents a disconnected and narration which you can cross-apply from the to and see now on the line like they say we are not environmental justice. And after yes you are only focused on the impact and not the process of how that goes. They only assume that all the indigenous populations suffer from the same consequences which our evidence indicates is just now they say it's controlled by the elites right now. That's exactly what the disconnected narration are. This you should not even be using these expertism. This is the one you're criticizing saying that the central government centralization of the policies they say they lead to long-lasting solvency. No, this is all a turn by a co-option argument. The one-size-fits-all mentality doesn't really work. The partly evidence from the one see also turns when the slave bounds out and pray for legal relief. You're just chaining yourself to the institution. We're just making the indigenous people addicted to the United States and the technology we give them to them, which means that they are never going to be tied to the United States and being co-opted. Their complexity arguments do not matter. We do not apply for arguments such as poverty and other predictions which are happening now. The United States federal government is not able. The alternative is able to resolve for that. Even if that's true, the Mexican government there's no reason in the one issue that says that the USMG has to do the plan.
Okay, we have 10 minutes.
9:37.
Sorry.
The order is going to be case, counterplan, critique, and then the disad.
Yeah.
Everyone ready? Essentialism linked to the K more than the F. Wilson is based on the biological condition of the black body, proven by their focus on local black struggles over any struggles anywhere else. If you don't link to this argument, the corruptors evidence makes a distinction between U.S. environmental justice and Mexico, because in Mexico is based on indigenous populations, which is what the warrants behind their evidence. Warrant by the evidence is that non-focusing on indigenous populations, reason by environmental justice is that don't link to their dualism turn. That's the Thompson evidence. I'll claim that on the critique. You can see the towers and the Miller evidence. Shifting the scale allows communities to use their own autonomy to challenge police by the Monroe County beating big oil by focusing on the scale of everyday experience. We're not about the outcome either. The entire zero politics advantage is about the process of change. Rejects framing issue. Rejects all the evidence that's about the U.S. environmental justice. This further makes the key distinction. And also the impact of essentialism. Counterpoint to the net benefit, you can see the Garrison evidence that Mexico's policy making sense and NAFTA has been increasing colonial violence because it's based on founded on the fungibility of the indigenous population and the ability to render those politics disposable. It's a question of the decision making, the mindset of the decision makers in Mexico. Brothers says that the Garrison Center are structurally caused violence approved by the 1C solvency advocate about the 1990s EV technology programs. Those were done through centralized politics, which is what the entire affirmative career says, and that's a dissent to the counterpoint. It's not double by another. Here, counterpoint goes through centralized, which is the one which means the one is a dissent, or they don't have a solvency advocate about decentralized solar power, which is the next question of the debate. Now, the solvency advocate is a yes, no question because they don't have any evidence to support that Mexico can pretend do it. All the ASCS evidence says that we need to create a bilateral agreement like the Mexico Renewable Energy Program between the U.S. and Mexico, so they can work together, create an initial technology of transfer, which inspires grassroots movements, and then the U.S. gets out right away, allows community autonomy in the short term. Okay. If the debate is about competing methodology, then you only get one, not the counterplan and the K. The counterplan also endorses civil society, which means that their method is flawed, because Wilson says civil society is that no co-option. We agree that the state is based on structures of violence, but you can still be useful in some instances, using the master's tool to tear down the masters. What the affirmative does, no slaves protection. They're far left with the legal solutions, not the combination of grassroots movements with a technology transfer like the affirmative. They can't turn a case. Their Wolderstone evidence asserts that all struggles are based on these slaves, but the fact that you can refer to Naima as a he 4 times in the 2NC, the 2NC appears that the alternative allows discrimination to continue. This is an independent reason to reject the app because it means that their in-round performance is a transformed sexism and turns their scholarship. You can deal with the video, same premise of the using sexist language, also intersectionality. Is that no answer? Replacing race with the turning back for anti-blackness ignores a myriad of other discrimination, age, gender, sexuality, all play a role. Let's see Hancock up. And his Grenfell Martin wasn't just black, he was also a teenager. This is a dissent to their scholarship because they ignore other forms of oppression, which is other forms of oppression. The Hillman box evidence this creates moral absolutism because it brushes off questions of environmental racism as irrelevant. This is a form of privilege. This is a form of privilege because they say that racism in America needs to be rejected first, but that ignores the intersections on sideline struggles of Latin America. The impact turns the K because it creates hierarchies which marginalized communities need to be addressed first. The ass solves this because we start all the movements against injustice. Now the role of the ballot is to focus on the lived experience of the oppressed, privileged position, to ignore the toxic pollution that too many indigenous populations are playing on in Mexico because the USFG is unethical. There's no move for them to solve that, to reverse that environmental injustice. The case is the case is a diss. They consider the nature term. That's the Thompson evidence and the Wise evidence. We control the root cause because creating a human-nature divide created the conditions for hierarchies of power like racism and patriarchy. Also, that's the 1 and C, 2-1 in our evidence on case by creating a distinction between the human and the non-human. That's why that means we need to reconsider what it means to be a human. The Thompson evidence says that we reorient technology around indigenous understandings of harmony with nature. We combine Western knowledge with indigenous understanding of how the planet works, which creates real role for the human and nature to solve the human versus nature divide, which they conceded is the root cause of racial violence and difference. Now, permutation, we endorse the entirety of the affirmative and still call for an end of the road. The affirmative operates on the physical level by using a technological transfer to get medical vaccines out of environmental racism, and the alternative results on the ethical level of ethically rejecting the USFG. The combination of the two solves best. It's not severance because we still endorse the entirety of the plan. We don't link to the Rodriguez evidence because we don't have a war in we don't have a war in that foreign war impact. No link to their stone turn because we combine the federal government action with an interrogation of racism. That's an interrogation of racism. Notice that was fine.
33.
23. Oh, man.
Okay, the counterpoint the case.
Do you mind if I run to the bathroom before I speak?
No, no.
I know you don't do that.
So we have to leave at like before 7 tomorrow. Yeah.
I would just gonna go early.
You're not supposed to see.
Go where?
Get the Bronx signs and then
I mean, you could just like stay and go when you want. Like it's really easy to get to. It takes a long time, but actually what I'm gonna do is there's like 2 people whose parents might be driving from around my neighborhood sometime. It might be early afternoon, but I'm not sure if they are yet. They might be going in the morning.
Sorry, can you repeat the order?
Okay, the counterpoint the case.
If you're using my calendar console, I would get a page paper.
Okay. Anyone not ready?
It's good. That one.
Oh my god, which one for okay. Alright. The question that you should ask yourself at the end of the round is the United States federal government justified or not? The negative says that the United States federal government is bad because of the past atrocity of the federal government in regard to racialized minorities. The one is complicit with that. Only by resisting the federal government, calling for the end to civil society can the black body be redeemed. There is violence underrated into the modern world's capacity to exist, think, and act, and we need to call this into question the existence of that world. The United States federal government was built on the bag of slaves, oppression of the Native Americans, and the killing of minorities. Only by calling the entire foundation in place can we have a true method to liberate Precious Group. That's what Willis and Evans. We are only going with the criticism, which is the reason why the alternative should be the one methodology that we can disband. The alternative is a better way for solving. There are a couple of turn case arguments that first is that they did not solve because they dropped the vegan animals coming out of the 1 yard. U.S. society will always be racist. This ties really well with the arguments about neoliberalism and U.S. influence. If U.S. influence is ever done in positive actual, that will it's like a disease. It is contagious. And the disease of the United States government racism will spread upon these environmental justice movement going to Mexico, which is the reason why the case is not solved. And the case will stay centralized and the resources won't go to the minorities. The second argument is the co-optation arguments that they have dropped. The marginal section evidence saying that hedges evidence was released that the foundation whiteness across all types of movements, even single action, single child policy that so firmly tries to do, which is the reason why they cannot solve because of structural whiteness is liberated. Will do it. Now the terrorization argument, slavery is perfection. The one you see demand for legal relief is a perfection of slavery. Yes, what you're doing is seeing your agency to the federal government, which is very bad because the federal government is once again that is saying that the federal government has power over you. By acknowledging that power is like bowing down to the slave master and actually shackling yourself because you can only be saved the legal relief. We need to reject that and call that into question, which is the reason why it's bad. That's the folly. It's not a line line. They said that the after destroys out of the federal government. No, you do not. You are blindly using the federal government structure for atheist policy, which is the reason why you don't do the following evidence says that any sort of agency to the federal government dead. Also, the wilderness alternative says that any mass action against civil society must be taken, and the bill is unethical in front of the federal government. Now she said that following about legal relief. You are legal relief. You are taking a legal solution to a systemic problem going on in Mexico, which is the reason why this legal system will fail. This is where also the drop Mexico policy settling comes in because Mexico does not want any of the shit. They drop that this is a say no argument for their plan. The reason why Mexico will reject U.S. assistance, that is the independent sovereign take on a reason to vote negative on presumption because we are linked to that state. Now the federals are critique. Okay, if I said he in the twinsie, I am very sorry, but I definitely remember saying she at the same time. The two of you are a team, and the arguments made by one member of the team should be interconnected because you debate as a team. And I was referring to both of you if I said he at times. But even so, the case should be able to solve the performance of this argument because the Wilson evidence is that the fungibility of these labels will cause the oppression of the feminism and the Marxists and all types of indigenous groups, which is the reason why they also another term take argument. Now the intersectionality this was not dropping this place. We say that intersectionality is bad because of the critique is a prior question. The affirmative does not solve intersectionality in the United States. This is where the Rodriguez really plays into place. The Rodriguez evidence says that when we focus on foreign wars instead of domestic wars at home, that means that we cannot take an intersectional approach at home, which is the reason why the critique covers. Also, the Wilson evidence says that the fungibility slave caused a oppression of all these are real. Now the moral absolutes are moral absolutes is good in its context because the Wilson evidence says that we need to take any action by any action as the father evidence says that we must burn everything down society. That's the only ethical action that we can take because the entire system has failed. That's the beginning evidence. Now she says that we create hierarchies of racism. The hierarchies of racism does not lead to movements. The affirmative doesn't solve these movements either because they do not include people inside the U.S. and those domestic people are the ones that matter more. It's a question of impact calculation. Should we focus on the foreign wars or the domestic atrocity that happened? Well, the affirmative says that we should focus on domestic atrocity, on the role of the ballot about indigenous people. It's bad because you have to have to role play this at coming with 1 yard. The Mitchell and Suzuki evidence says that when you give your agency to fight government, call for change and role play to fight government, that creates passivity and nobody will change, which is the reason why the negative forward says independently bad. The impact of this is the following evidence because you are seeing your agency do label again, which means that the case is not this. Also, if even the case is this at the Yamamoto Lyman evidence from the environmental justice debate says that one-shot policy actions always fail because they fail in carry history. Now the human nature arguments, we're side the Willis evidence turns argument also because the fundamentality of the slave is what caused the human nature to rise in the first place. Also, it's good to focus on the human because that's the only way to resolve the fundamentality of the slave, which is the reason why alternate solves externally impacted this argument. Now, the permutation of not only their job is available to be methodologies and that the one you say static are for it. Once they several argument discourse of the fact you do not tear it down. There's no immediate evidence this after the permutation because it says that you're disconnecting objective narration, like using the fact without actually carrying history and also putting your faith in the fact is bad because it causes you to have the white epistemological put a stance of policy making. Also the Rodriguez evidence and trade-off linked with the permutation because the total focus on foreign wars and domestic wars does not work. You need to prioritize the domestic wars in order to actually solve these arguments. Also, the Mexico policy link was another dropped argument. And also, the finally evidence is a link because your use of the federal government is bad. The Mexico on their counterpoint. We're not going to go for the counterpoint. All your reasons are just a reason to reject the counterpoint. We're not going to. That is no longer a performance. Now the case is the argument about how the centralism link more does not impact it in 1 year. We'll concede the argument that scalar politics that you should reject all the evidence about environmental justice in the Constitution, which is that this evidence is no longer in play. It's only a question of the alternative versus the plan, and the alternative is sufficiently better because the alternative is the only one that calls the fundamentally black people. They literally do not do anything about all the racial minorities at home. The alternative is a better methodology to do that. We said that they should be prioritized because the United States federal government puts violence upon them throughout the entirety of history. Racism is a prior question. That's demanding evidence over any sort of environmental justice.
Okay, we have 322 starting the press.
Still not working.
It's going to be on the K.
What?
It's just going to be on the K. Okay, is anyone not ready? Good. Big issue, the 2NR doesn't write the ballot for you, so I'll do it here. There are 3 reasons to vote. Addresses to the app outweighs the status quo, commodifies nature, and allows elite control. They allow the toxic dumping of waste into indigenous communities' backyards through the centralization and commodification of energy. Only the plan allows the actual solar technology to go to indigenous communities so that they have the ability to control their own energy so that they can have things like clean water that don't exist in the status quo. Only the app would solve for this because there's no explanation of all solvency. Now, second is that they have conceded that nature dualism is the root cause of all of the impacts. He asserts that racism is what causes all of the impacts, but there's no explanation, which is a reason to prefer the 1AR and 2AR analysis. The Thompson evidence indicates that when we infuse the Western technology around an indigenous understanding of solar energy flow, it means that we default to something called degrowth or growth review, which is when we focus on sustainable development instead of constant growth. It means that we focus on how technologies can be rooted into indigenous knowledge so that these communities have the power to create a harmony with nature as they had in the past. This solves the nature dualism, which is the root cause of all the impacts. The wise evidence indicates that when we had the distinction between human and nature, it allowed us to create a distinction between different races and different genders because it's what allowed us to characterize the human. Only the app breaks down what it means to be human and what it means to have human characteristics so that we solve all structures of inequality that's life. Now, second is that even if it doesn't outweigh the role of the ballot, is that we solve one is that you solve with implementation. So if the app solves one smaller instance, it's better than not solving for any instance. They say that ethically it's good to vote for them, but there's no impact. Why that's the best debate. The Olsen 3 evidence says that live oppression is a good framework because the focus on fear, because the focus on theory means that we never have any solutions because intellectuals are always stuck in the ivory tower and they can say that the flag is dead, but that doesn't allow solving any structural harms. There isn't an actual cause of ripping down the state. They have made these ethics argument, but the key framework for the debate is that it is the plan versus the K, not the U.S. federal government versus not the U.S. federal government. We just have to win that using them in the instance of the 1AC was a good idea. And the third reason to vote out is the independent intersectionality. This has that I will get to on the line by line. Go to the line by line. Let me deal with the overview first. He says that we allow the past atrocities, but they haven't provided any alternative solvency, which means that we just need to prove that the U.S. is justified in the act, which we have, because the ASC evidence says that they are the only ones with the pay-to-pay technology, which means that the initial transfer is what gets the U.S. out in the long term because it creates self-sufficiency for the indigenous population. Now, second, they say society is always racist, but these broad claims are answered by the specificity of the app solvency mechanisms. The 1AC addresses the question of how we consume energy by critiquing elite control and developing a framework for assessing energy justice. That's Miller, or questioning of who is the status quo energy good for and who is decentralized energy good for. Changes the scale of politics. That shifts of scale to everyday experience allows grassroots movements. That empirically breaks down injustice as towers. The Border Conservancy won a suit against big oil by using using everyday experience and the scale of environmental injustice to stop the dumping of toxic waste into soil where impoverished children play. This means that even if the app is a focus on the local struggles, it creates a broader movement that solves injustice across the globe, which means we solve for your arguments about problems in America. Now, the rest of the lemma line, he says that we are a legal relief, but that's not true. We are a transfer of technology. They say that Mexico would reject it. AJ answered this in the one era when he stated that the MREP was a program in the past that they accepted. They also conceded that